Hello out there, and thank you again for joining me today on the Happy PharmD podcast. My name is Chris Bakley, and I'm your host. Today's episode is going to be specifically helpful for anyone out there who is looking to make a career transition and potentially in the informatics or IT field of pharmacy. You may not know too much about this field, but there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of different varieties of informatics in pharmacy. And today's pharmacist specifically is an informatics pharmacist and also is out there providing content and educational information for technology used in pharmacy. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Tony Dow to the Happy PharmD podcast. All right. Well, thank you so much again for joining us on the Happy PharmD podcast. Today, I have pharmacist Tony Dow with us. Welcome to the podcast, Tony.
Thank you. I'm pretty glad to be on the podcast today. Thanks for the opportunity.
No, thank you so much for you joining us today. So I just wanted to start out today. You can kind of introduce yourself, where you're from, where you currently are, where you went to school, and what you're doing now as a pharmacist.
So my name is Tony Dow, and I was born and raised in Orange County, California, and I went to undergrad in Irvine at UC Irvine. Then I went to pharmacy school at USC School of Pharmacy, and my focus after graduation was getting into the technology space. So that's pharmacy informatics. So that's currently what I do now. So after graduating from pharmacy school, I started working at the county hospital with their implementation of an electronic health record, and learned a lot on that. And after 5 years of that, I moved to where I'm at now, which is in Orange County. It's a pediatric hospital. And so today I'm just doing pretty much the same thing, but in different projects, using some of my experience in the past to optimize certain things now. And currently I live in Anaheim.
Awesome. No, so I guess let's start back at the beginning. You made it sound like you kind of knew what you wanted to do when you were in pharmacy school already. Is that right? Or
So that is half right. During pharmacy school, I didn't really know yet what I was going to do because when I went into pharmacy school, my mindset was I'm going to do graveyard shifts in the community pharmacy, 7 on, 7 off. That was like my primary goal when I started pharmacy school. And then I found out that, there's actually this field, like halfway through pharmacy school, I was just doing some personal research. Found out that there's this field where you can apply technology to pharmacy. And I've always had a hobbyist interest in technology applications and things like that. I did some programming for fun. And I was like, this is like something that will probably fit with my skill set and interest really well. So kind of try to make it like very apparent to all my preceptors and professors and my classmates too, that that's a field that I am very strongly interested in. And over time, word got around that, all these projects I've done for school, word got around and helped me land a gig right after graduation as an informatics pharmacist over in the county hospital. So
Awesome. So I'm really surprised you wanted to do the graveyard shift, by the way, 7 on, 7 off. Not many people, want to sign up for that.
Yeah, I didn't know at the time. I was just going into pharmacy school. I'm like, maybe 7 days off is actually nice. So that's why I thought about it. But
I did that when I graduated. I did that actually, retail side, but I did overnights it was 7 on, 7 off. Mine wasn't true though, because I had to work every other Friday as well. So it kind of broke up the schedule. It was more like 4 days on, 3 days off. But
okay.
I loved it for a month, and then the second month, when you can't get into that rhythm of sleeping during the day, that's when it really doesn't become as much fun. I know a lot of people that love it, and I know a bunch of overnight pharmacists that really love that. But I think it takes the kind of person who can flip their schedule like that and be able to sleep during the day. I'm surprised that just surprised me a little bit that you said you kind of wanted to do that initially. But in terms of learning more about informatics, and I know you said you had an interest in technology already, so when you landed that job, I guess for someone who maybe isn't familiar with an informatics pharmacist or what exactly that entails, do you mind just kind of going over that a little bit?
Yeah, so informatics pharmacy, like it's very broad in a sense that there's so many different niche that you can get into within like that niche of itself. For me, I was on the inpatient side when I was at the county hospital, and what I was doing at the time was helping build up the new system. So there were a lot of things like building up the medication entries, making sure that the synonyms, they're called synonyms. So like the generic and the brand and some specific brands, they're all synonyms of each other,
Okay.
making sure that was all configured correctly. And then that database of what the provider sees is something different than what the pharmacy stocks. So making sure that the pharmacy item itself is linked over to the right synonym, and then ensuring those interaction checks are correct. And other things like building alerts into the system that will help drive the provider to order things more accurately. Like, for example, patients' creatinine clearance may be low for a certain medication that goes through renal clearance. If they're ordering that renal clearance and this patient's clearance is low, then it fires an alert to remind them, hey, you want to check this out? Maybe an issue. So things like that. Also ensuring like the barcoded medication administration side is built correctly so that when nurses scan the barcode of the label of the medication at the bedside, it's matching with what the inventory was ordered for, like what the product was ordered for that order. So that's what I worked on when I was over at the county hospital. So now that I'm over at the pediatric hospital, I have a lot of the same duties, but some additional things are getting our oncology EHR up and running. It's been up, but we're still like phasing in some additional like order sets and ensuring those workflows are appropriate and follow the complex workflows that are needed for oncology. And one of the newer things that I was just starting to work on is getting our investigational drug therapy third-party system up and running so that our investigational drug arm of the hospital can have all those documentations be done more efficiently and accurately so that audits can, be more quickly done and more accurately done for these auditing bodies, these sponsors and things like that. So generally, that's what I do, but there's also a lot of different duties that other informatics pharmacists do as well. Some of them work in companies that create these systems for community pharmacies so that they can use it to verify their medications and document prescriptions, things like that. Some pharmacists work in tech startups and work on things like, I know there's this company that makes a robot that stays with the patient at home to remind them and talk to them about taking their meds. And the pharmacist will work with the creative writer in that company to ensure that all the information is accurate and also forming connection with the patient. There's also other companies that work on technology, specific technologies in the inpatient setting. Like one company is KitCheck. They're an RFID company where they use RFID to make crash cart filling more efficient. And there's pharmacists on staff there as well. So there's a lot of different avenues that a pharmacist can do in the informatics space. And what I do is just like one of those avenues.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't realize there was such a so many like unlimited opportunities. Really, it sounds like, especially with technology growing and all these different ideas coming out with startups and stuff. It's not really limited to just retail or hospital or general pharmacy that you would think about that comes to mind right away. How would one get into that? I know you were kind of doing some residencies and preceptoring, kind of getting your name out there when you were in school. How would you recommend to someone who that sounds interesting, or maybe they already have a little bit of a IT or technology background, that may be finishing up pharmacy school or has been a pharmacist for 20 years, but maybe wants to do a career change? How would you recommend someone getting into that?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it really depends on where you are in your career. I would say for students right now, one of the things that is highly recommended is to get a mentor. And having a mentor is as easy as reaching out to someone on LinkedIn who has a job that you're interested in. A lot of people in informatics are very open to sharing their paths and sharing like what they've done. And that's one way, or going into a formalized mentorship program with something like something like Happy PharmD, right? So there's a mentorship program there. Another way is just to look at all the free courses that you can do online that are related to technology. And some of the ones that I recommend are, I would say that the number one thing I recommend is learning about database, because almost every healthcare system stores data in a relational database. So I would recommend that if you can, go online, find some free courses on SQL. It's a type of database system, and learning how to like query it and how it's structured. And just learning that gets you a kind of a leg up in understanding how data is stored. And being an informatics pharmacist doesn't necessarily mean you need to know how to program, but understanding the concepts of programming is also very beneficial. So usually I also recommend, if you want to learn the concepts of programming, go for something like Python, because Python is one of the most straightforward languages you can learn. You're not necessarily going to have to apply specifically Python in your job, but understanding those concepts will help you when you are in the position learning a new language that's proprietary to that electronic health record.
Actually, I wanted to chime into that. So
Yeah.
if someone doesn't, maybe they aren't as super savvy with computers, or maybe
Mhm.
not familiar with programming, in terms of your day-to-day, like with what you're doing or along that scope, how much is it computer programming based? Are you doing that specifically, or are you more someone else doing it for you, but you're kind of doing the pharmacist side, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, so I can explain a little bit about that. Our team is a little bit larger than the previous place I was at. So right now we have 4 different informatics pharmacists, and 2 of us do a lot of the programming work. So there is some programming in it, but it's a proprietary language to our EHR. The other 2 pharmacists don't touch it at all because they have other specific duties
Okay.
where they're more involved with design and building order sets. So there's still that aspect as well. I mean, both roles, you do have to have a pharmacist involved because the pharmacist person will have the operational knowledge of how the pharmacy works, right? Like, how does the workflow go from ordering to transcribing to dispensing and administration? Otherwise, it's no different than just hiring anyone that can program. So does that kind of answer your question?
Of course, no, I was just curious if it was a deal breaker if someone wasn't very savvy or strong with IT, but then that makes sense. And I feel like what do you say would be a benefit though for someone trying to break into this field if they were to try to learn like a little bit of coding, or just more understanding the concept would be enough?
If they do know the coding, I think it's a slightly beneficial skill. But I think the most beneficial skill of someone going into the informatics space is operational knowledge of how a pharmacy works.
Gotcha.
Because a lot of the skills that are used in the technology side, you can learn. You can learn it on the job. You can learn it outside of your job, like on your own time. But the clinical knowledge and the workflow knowledge is what makes the pharmacist position, their experience, valuable.
Gotcha.
Because
Gotcha.
yeah, you can't really apply technology to pharmacy workflow if you don't know what that workflow is, right?
Mhm. Of
So
course. And I guess how long, I'm just curious from the history of like an informatics pharmacist, how long has this been, have you seen this in terms of 10 years ago? How I'm assuming it's been a huge increase, or in terms of a lot of change, at least from if you were to be an informatics pharmacist 5, 10 years ago. How are you seeing it change the field?
yeah, the field has changed a lot. I mean, the field started more like in the 80s or so,
Okay.
and then they did have like a few residencies that then went away. They were called pharmacy computer systems residencies. And in the past few years, when I started, it was still during the time when the government was doing meaningful use, where that means that the hospitals had to be on electronic health records by a certain time to get reimbursed. So
Gotcha.
at that time, the field was starting to expand. And at that time, I guess the standard way of getting into the field was, either you're already working on staff and you have an interest, or you just graduated and you had an interest, something like that. Nowadays, there's a little bit more of a defined path where you can do it that way still, but then there's also residency programs that are PGY2 now, where if you go through that route, you have a little bit more of a formalized training on, I guess, what the fundamentals are that you need to know when you get into this field. So in that respect, the education has changed. And in regards to education in the schools, a lot more schools are now incorporating some of the lectures about pharmacy informatics into their program. And some of the schools are also incorporating use of electronic health records during their case studies. So that's pretty cool that the students get to use an electronic health record, get used to it while they're still learning their clinical aspects.
Oh,
So,
that's awesome. Okay.
I
Yeah, I
think
didn't.
those are the main things that changed.
Okay, no, I didn't realize that they were starting to throw that into even pharmacy school classes. That's very cool. And in terms of, I know you said it's starting to become more of a defined path, and I think, are you also still working per diem as well as a clinical pharmacist on the side?
Yes, yeah. I work per diem, and the reason why is like I kind of mentioned before, operational and clinical workflow knowledge is very important. And for me, like I have this feeling of like if I don't do that in my per diem job, I'm not gonna know how to do my current job that well.
Okay.
So I would lose like kind of like my clinical side. So I know that there's different schools of thought on that. Sometimes the workflow for an informatics pharmacist is so busy, you just don't have the time to still do per diem jobs. I just try to make an attempt to do that. I don't do it as often as before. Now it's kind of like once every 6 weeks or so. But yeah, before, I think when I first started, I was doing 4 days informatics and 3 days per diem. And I think that was too much. So
Okay. Well, I was gonna say
yeah,
that's a handful. It's definitely keeping you busy for sure.
yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And would you say comparing the two, if you were to be like, let's say, a full-time clinical pharmacist or more in that scope, retail hospital versus being an informatics pharmacist, I'm obviously they differ greatly. Would you say the stress level or demand is comparable, or how would you describe the difference in terms of day to day?
Sorry, can you explain?
Oh yeah, like in terms of, I guess, this day and age, a lot of people are experiencing burnout, let's say, or more exhausted from work or higher demand. Would you say it's that you're still experiencing? You had pharmacists that experience that in the informatics field, or is it not as much?
I think there is. It's just a different type of demand. Like for the operational side, like you have these immediate things you need to do for the day. On the informatics side, you do have some of those things like break fixes, like things that are expected to work a certain way, and you got to fix it for the day. But then you got these larger scale projects that you have to constantly be on top of, and then
Gotcha.
meet these deadlines. So there's still that sense, and I don't think there's any less burnout between the two. It's still just the level is about the same, but it's a different type of burnout.
Gotcha. And you also, do you have zero patient contact, or do you guys still have some contact with patients?
For my current position, there's zero patient contact.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I feel like for some people that that would definitely be they would like that, and other people because they can just kind of focus on clinical and more technology side, and for others who I could see why maybe they would want to do like kind of what you were doing, the per diem on the side, just to get a little bit more of face to face with patients sometimes, but also get to be in the informatics side as well. But also, I'd like to kind of switch gears here and jump into a little bit about yourself. You said you were doing a podcast and a couple other things on the side as well.
Yeah. One of my things is I want to make sure that the education for informatics is out there, and I do get a lot of students that ask me about certain topics, and I do get a lot of people that ask me about what an informatics pharmacist does. And I started my podcast, which is called Pharmacy IT and Me, like about over a year ago. And the purpose of that was kind of like getting these mini episodes out with like these different topics. So it's easy for me to refer students to it for certain topics. And then the other thing was to get interviews of different people in the technology pharmacy application side, so speaking to all these different people, getting their stories, all these people's advice about how to get into the field, and then sharing that with people who are listening, who are interested, which can be students or can be pharmacists looking for a career change. But the other thing that's really nice about that is I'm still learning. I'm still learning about all these new fields that I get to learn about when I speak with all these different informatics pharmacists or technology pharmacists. So that's been really rewarding to kind of be part of and be able to share with all my listeners too. So that's been really great.
Of course, yeah. Have you been getting a lot of people reaching out to you since you started the podcast, to students or just other pharmacists in general?
Yeah. I mean, like I was actually very surprised at the amount of people who actually listen to the podcast, because when I started, I'm like, this is a very niche field. Who's going to listen to this? And it turns out, a lot of people do. So yeah, it's been really great to connect with people who have shared an interest in it. And also, what's been really rewarding for me too is seeing some of the people that I've spoken with then eventually go on to get into the informatics field. So that's been really cool to see too.
No, that's awesome. Are you also providing some kind of like coaching, or is it more just the podcast and just advice in that way for other
Yeah, right now
pharmacists?
it's just the podcast, and when they ask me about some questions, I'll sometimes schedule like a call with them and just talk about like what their kind of goals are and where they are in their career, and just provide my opinions. But I'm only one person. I always suggest that they reach out to some of these other people that are in the field that may be in a different part of informatics that they're more interested in, like maybe data science or something like that. So.
Gotcha. No, it sounds like with pharmacy informatics, the field, in terms of the options are endless. I would say endless in terms of what kind of direction you want to take or what journey you want to go down with that. And on top of the podcast, you also are also part of the let's see here, Pharmacy Informatics Academy. Do you mind explaining what that is a little bit?
Yeah, so the Pharmacy Informatics Academy kind of came together because so I started a podcast, and I guess on social media people have been realizing that, oh, I'm associated with this podcast. And then on social media there's also Beju Shah, who's a very um, very well-known digital content creator for informatics on LinkedIn. Then we have Brian Fung, who does all the YouTube videos. And then David Vu has been doing a lot of Instagram stuff. So we kind of like just all talked about like our goals and what we want to do with informatics and education and spreading out the education to people, training the next generation. And it kind of was really nice that we all like had very similar goals. So we were just like, hey, let's come together and do something. So that's how Pharmacy Informatics Academy started. And right now we're pushing out some content, educating everybody about the different things that people can do in informatics and some of the tools that can be helpful for people that are currently working in the field, some of the certifications people can get, things like that right now. We're still working through what we want to do in the future, but right now, the main goal is just to get some content out there for people to see when they go to our website and they want to learn a little bit more about like technology and pharmacy.
And you started that, you said, after the podcast, or?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
It was about a year after. We launched it in December, but we didn't start posting content until last month.
Oh wow, so it's very recent actually.
Yeah.
In terms of posting content.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What, and in terms of, you just meet these other people through mutual connections, or did you already know the other pharmacists that you decided to join up with?
I always knew of Brian Fung because of his videos. I met David Vu through my podcast because I interviewed him. And then I met Beju Shah randomly at ASHP, just through one of the events.
Yeah. No, that's so cool that you guys all teamed up together to do something like that. That's very unique and very interesting, especially for informatics field as well, since it's a unique niche, as you said. And I guess I kind of, for those listening who maybe want to make that transition from a career or in general to informatics pharmacy, what are like the top 3 things you'd recommend for them to do if they were trying to make that transition now?
I think the first thing is they need to make sure they really enjoy what they're going to jump into. Okay. Because this is one of those roles where you think you know what the role is, but when you get into it, you may not enjoy it because personality difference or something like that. So I would say figure out if this is what you really want to do first. And one of those things would be like figure out if you could shadow someone or maybe just do your research and talk to someone. So that's one thing. The second thing is finding a mentor, reaching out to people who are already in the field and seeing if anyone is open to mentoring you a little bit more. And then the third thing is look into your own experiences to see if you have any transferable skills that you can either update or leverage for putting on your CV to say that these skills are essential in informatics. Things like project management, things like great teamwork skills, things like thinking creatively outside of the box. Those are skills that are very beneficial to have when you're in the informatics field. And you may not even think about that at first, but look through your experiences, see if you have any of the skills already, and then update your CV and maybe have someone look at it to see if it's up to speed with like what's currently going on with informatics.
No, that's awesome advice. And I was just curious. It just kind of came across my mind here. Is there a certain areas of the country where you see informatics growing more in terms of people that are maybe on the job lookout for different options out there?
I'll be honest, I haven't really looked at that, but I mean, it's a little bit more of like selection bias where I see it more in metropolitan areas.
Yeah.
But I'm not really sure if that's accurate. So.
Gotcha. And I'm sure a lot of people may be curious, is this job, do you see it being done remotely a lot, or is it still a lot more still on site for informatics pharmacists?
That also depends on what kind of technologies are being used. So, for example, my previous role, a lot of the technologies were on site. Like, for example, our Pyxis machines, they're not able to be logged in remotely. And our smart pumps, they're not able to be logged in remotely, things like that. EHR was able to be logged in remotely, but you can't really do full troubleshooting because of that. In my current role, we are mostly on site. However, our systems are set up in a way that they can be remoted into because we are also on call. So we rotate on call, and when we're on call, we have the ability to remotely log in to troubleshoot the full thing, like all our Pyxis machines, all of our EHR and clinical decision support, things like that. But we are still on site. And then there are other institutions that I've seen where they are on site 1 day a week, and then they spend most of the time remote. and then some places are 100% remote. So it's really dependent on
Gotcha.
what is existing already in that institution in terms of their technology and their ability to remote in.
Awesome. No, that's really useful information. No, really, Tony, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for joining me today. Especially for anyone out there who may want to reach out to you, what's the best way to get in contact with you if they have questions or looking for a mentor, or just trying to get some more information that you guys are also sharing online as well? What's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, the best way you could reach out to me is probably by LinkedIn. You could just find me, Tony Dow. And another way to reach out to me is my email. It's tony.dow.farmd@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tony. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again for joining me today on this episode with Tony, informatics specialist in pharmacy. I really hope you got some good information, and potentially this could be your next career path if you're looking to make a transition from where you currently are. I hope you realize that there are so many different options out there in the forms of IT pharmacy. There's not just one size fits all. There are really, truly a ton of options out there if this is a transition that you do want to make from your current career path. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions, as well as Tony. And I really feel like some of the really good advice that he provided was especially trying to look out there and find a mentor to shadow. Someone that is already doing this, that you can possibly shadow or just ask questions and determine if this really is a true fit for you. Again, thank you again for joining us today on the podcast. I look forward to seeing you next time.